Hello, all. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tom Kelly, Vice President of Civics Initiatives at the Jack Miller Center, an organization committed to education the principles of the American founding. So the big ideas: liberty, equality, justice, democracy, citizenship, ideas that remain foundational to our constitutional democracy. Now, with our partners, we at the Jack Miller Center are building a movement to strengthen civics education through activities that include professional advancement for young scholars, support for new institutes, schools, departments dedicated to civic thought and leadership, our annual National Summit on Civic Education, and a host of professional learning opportunities for K-12 civics and history teachers through our founding Civics Initiative. You can learn more about all these efforts on our website at jackmillercenter.org. But we're here today to solve the K-12 civics crisis, which is a tall order for an hour's webinar, but we'll see what we can do. It is Civic Learning Week. Happy Civics Week to everybody. And we have some wonderful guests with us to sort out this issue. We have Danielle Allen, Robert Burton, and Lianne Cottrell, whom I will introduce in a moment. But that we have a civics crisis is, I think, beyond doubt. There are no shortage of statistics that one can cite. You've got the National Assessment of Education Progress, or NAEPS, scores for 8th grade civics and history that are among the lowest they've ever been. You have polls that show a profound lack of attachment to our political system, our way of life. There's a Quinnipiac poll that came out a couple years ago that shows that less than half of 18 to 34-year-olds say they would defend our country if it was invaded. Another poll found that less than a third of millennials consider it essential to live in a democracy. Clearly, civic education is failing in a fundamental way. So what can be done about it? That's what we're here to talk about. And so I will introduce our panelists and we'll get the conversation going. First, we have Danielle Allen, professor of political philosophy, ethics, and public policy in the government department at Harvard. She's director of the Allen Lab for Democracy Renovation and the Democratic Knowledge Project. She's a principal author of the Educating for American Democracy Roadmap, which offers an inquiry framework for high-quality civics and history instruction across grade levels. Danielle and her team are currently hard at work on helping teachers to use the roadmap, and the Jack Miller Center is partnering with Danielle and her team on that, and very excited to see the progress that we can make on that in coming years. Danielle is also the author of two very important books in the civic space: Our Declaration and Reading the Declaration of Independence and Defense of Equality, and Talking to Strangers on the Anxieties of Citizenship Since Brown v. Board of Education. Robert Burton is the director of Civic Thought and Leadership, the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative in the Center for Constitutional Studies at Utah Valley University. He teaches courses in American political thought, constitutional law, with a particular emphasis on freedom of religion and conscience. In fact, he's working on a book entitled A Conscience Safe for Politics, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and the Formation of the Modern Conscience. Now, as director of CTLI, the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative, he's very involved in K-12 civics instruction. He's led a number of workshops and institutes for teachers across Utah. In 2022, he co-authored a report, The State of Civic Education in Utah, and he's currently working with EAD to implement curricula at the K-5 level. Finally, we have Lianne Cottrell, who teaches AP US Government and AP European History at a high school in Northern Virginia. She studied political science at Villanova University with JMC scholar Colleen Sheehan, and as I just found out, also Danielle Allen's father, Bill Allen. And she's working on a master's degree in history from the University of Edinburgh. Now, outside the classroom, she served as a consultant for a Gilder Lehrman project on the U.S. Naturalization and Citizenship Test, and she just completed the Jack Miller Center's American Political Tradition Fellowship, a year-long program focused on reading, discussing, and building curriculum around foundational texts in the American political tradition. So thank you, Lianne, Danielle, Robert, for being with us. We'll get this conversation going. We'll speak for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll address some of the questions that were received beforehand. For those of you listening, if you are If a question occurs to you while you're watching the webinar, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll try to get to that at the end. So Danielle, I'll start with you, and I want to talk about the importance of founding documents in civic education. In your book, Our Declaration, you wrote about the particular importance of the Declaration for civics reform, civic education reform. You wrote, "There are no silver bullets for the problem of civility in our political life. There are no panaceas for educational reform. But if I were to pretend to offer either, it would be this. All adults should read the Declaration closely. All students should have read the Declaration from start to finish before they leave high school." So, Danielle, why is reading the Declaration the almost silver bullet that we need for civics reform?
That's so funny. Thank you, Tom, for starting with that. I had to brace myself when you were going to share what my prescription was, because of course one always, makes mistakes when one does that. So at any rate, but no, I'll stand by that one. I would continue to say that reading the Declaration of Independence is a fundamental building block and can do a lot of good. Let me answer not in my own name, but in the name of some students I had about 25 years ago, Tia and Naya and EJ and Rita, among others. They were night students, adults in a program in the humanities for low-income adults, people who wanted to make their way back into the educational system after having dropped out of it. And I will admit that I began teaching the Declaration purely instrumentally. I had not particularly good reasons for teaching it. It was simply that it was short. And I was looking for excellent short texts to teach to students who sometimes hadn't necessarily finished a GED degree. So the 1,337 words of the Declaration were tempting just for that purely instrumental reason. But those students that I mentioned, Tia, Naya, and EJ, and Rita, and others, about 15 others, had a kind of explosive reaction to the Declaration. It captivated their imaginations instantly. We read it out loud together. And I realized that it did because the Declaration tells a story. And it told the same story that my students were living. The Declaration tells a story of a group of people who consider their circumstances, they find them wanting, and they decide to make a change. So it's a story fundamentally about human agency, human moral judgment, and then the practices of cooperation and coordination needed to exercise that agency and moral judgment in a positive direction. And my students were trying to do just that in their class, and they understood a shared experience, therefore, between themselves and that text. And for me, that was just one of the best teaching experiences of my life. And it brought all the core questions to light about democracy, about constitutionalism, about how we interact with each other across lines of division and argumentation. So I just deeply believe in the power of the Declaration to teach, as well as to set a standard for what free self-government should fundamentally be about.
Now, in your book, you wrote you call it Our Declaration, and you refer to it as your patrimony, your inheritance. Mm-hmm. Is that how your students saw it at first, or did they come to see it as also their inheritance, their patrimony, or how did that go, or did it always remain maybe just a tool or something?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that question. So no, I mean, I think it's a fair and important question. I think few students these days start with the idea that the Declaration is their patrimony. I mean, quite the opposite, in fact, right? Because we typically think that the author was Thomas Jefferson. That obscures, of course, the fact that it was written by committee, and the committee included John Adams and Ben Franklin, who were actively advocating against enslavement at the time of the drafting. Nonetheless, people take up the Declaration and they sort of hold it at arm's length. They think it belongs to another time and place, a time and place where people did things like endorse slavery. We can't do that, therefore we can't embrace the Declaration. So then when people actually read the text, spend time with its words, and especially focus in on its core arguments about human agency and decision-making, I do think it has a dramatic sort of reorienting effect. And I do think what people can see is the way in which the sort of questions of time and place are more nuanced than their original perception, that the text makes an argument that anybody should wrestle with. And the invitation to wrestle with it, that's what the real patrimony is. The invitation to take really seriously its questions about agency and shared decision-making and free self-government among free and equal citizens. So that's where the patroni is, and people do come to agree with that and to take that on board.
Robert, how about you? How do you teach the Declaration? How do you teach it? What do you hope your students get out of it?
Sure. Well, I agree with all that Danielle has said, and I appreciate her bringing out both the substance, but also the pedagogical tool that the Declaration can be. Right. But I think one of the things, one of the canaries in the coal mine that we use to identify the crisis of civics that we're in is the lack of respect for institutions, for political institutions. And we've seen that drop precipitously among all sorts of different kinds of institutions in our society. One of the things that I think matters so much about the Declaration and why it's this almost silver bullet, as it were, is because it gives the why to the what of the Constitution, of our institutions, particularly our constitutional institutions. Abraham Lincoln famously said that the Declaration is like an apple of gold. The Constitution is a frame of silver that protects and encircles it. And so, as I teach my students in the university, and as I work with teachers who are working in the K through 12 sphere, helping them understand the why in the principles enunciated in the Declaration make the institutions matter, right? If the institutions feel distant, they feel like they're connected with oppression in some kind of way, if they're not seen as the collective way in which we can then disagree and engage with each other to achieve the more perfect union that the Declaration and Constitution are both pointing towards, then we're in trouble. And so that's one of the reasons why I think it's so core, and to specifically focus on that relationship of the principles of the Declaration with the law of the Constitution and its relationship to our institutions.
What about you, Lianne? What are the particular challenges in teaching the Declaration in the high school classroom? What do you see there?
Well, I would say that these days the challenge is how to draw their wonder and how to inspire them with this document that's from the 18th century. And to echo many of the points that have already been made, I don't see myself in this document, or was this written for me? And I think that to echo what Danielle said and what Robert said, the nuance is complicated, but we can wrestle with the text of the document first. And it does make very powerful claims about accident and force and versus reflection and choice. And I think fundamentally, as teenagers, they get the kind of challenge of power and right. I mean, you're in peak rebellion stage, I think, as a teenager. And so to relate that experience of wanting to fight against power or the man, so to speak, I kind of try to draw them in on that and to say, well, they are choosing this. And so then to go to the why and then use that to frame the what when we get to the Constitution, I think putting all those things together and really trying to draw on their experiences and things that they can relate to that are happening in their lives today that are relevant to them, and getting them to think through these questions of justice is really fundamental about the Declaration. And so it's such a springboard to do different things and to offer a venue to look at the American experience from such a multitude of different angles. So yeah, I love teaching the Declaration.
To Leanne's point, Tom, if I may,
Please,
it's fascinating that in the same document you both have the natural right to rebellion, right, which, like you say, Lianne, would fit so well with that age group of students. At the same time, coupled with the emphasis on reason and giving reasons, right, that compel us to the separation, and then also civic virtue and the kind of discipline that the citizen needs, both through the exercise of prudence, right, in the first two paragraphs, the invocation of prudence, but also at the end when they're willing to dedicate their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. So it's both a kind of a rebellious breaking with things kind of document, but also is very much rooted in the kind of citizens that we need to be and the kind of self-restraint and self-government that we need to invoke. So it actually leads to really great questions about rebellion versus self-control, about Anyway, we stop there.
Fundamental tensions, right, in the American order. Yeah. It's like how to balance liberty and order and preserve justice and freedom for all. And, those are questions that we're always going to be wrestling with. And so what I ultimately tell my students by the end of the year is, the work of the founding is never done. We're always building this country. And, to echo what was said long ago, it's a republic if you can keep it. And so, to that end, we do need civic virtue, and they need to practice these principles with prudence. So, yeah.
Well, part of the challenge in solving the K-12 civics crisis is a crisis of social studies to a degree. There was a Thinking Nation report that came out that referred to social studies as a second-class subject. And they're referring mainly to the resources that it receives from school districts, but also the attention of administrators. But I don't know. Do you think the Declaration is an antidote to that kind of second-class status, or embracing it as a patrimony and inheritance as something something that commands a certain obligation, I guess you could say. To me, I wonder if it can't play that role. Whereas if we just focus on the cultivation of skills, without these sort of elements of tradition, inheritance, and things like that, we're kind of missing something. I don't know, but that is part of the challenge of social studies today. Another challenge is the politicization that we see kind of all around us. Affects our society, affects our politics. It certainly affects civics and history classes. So Lianne, I'm wondering, particularly in your case, I mean, how do you find teaching the founding or teaching current issues? Do you feel pressure to teach to a certain narrative, or give our audience an idea of what it's like on the ground to teach in the contemporary moment?
So I'm in a very interesting circumstance where I do teach in a private school in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. So the polarization is just ever present. And then I personally live in Loudoun County, which has been the hotbed of a lot of debate over what is happening in schools, not just with civic education, but generally speaking. And so having kind of a view of those things, what I would say is that the students are a lot less polarized than, I guess, the adults in the room. And I think that the students, generally speaking, when I have their attention and their buy-in, are attentive and they are listening, but they just kind of don't understand America. And that's a result, I think, of just years of atrophy in the educational system. And so there is this hunger and this yearning to understand what their inheritance is, because when you tell them they have it, it's like, wait, what? What am I supposed to do with this? What does this all mean? And I think that encountering for the first time with a teacher like me is kind of jarring. But I am very hopeful when I have robust civil discussions in my classroom. People are generally respectful of other people's opinions. And I actually started the year before COVID. So, I've definitely taught through polarizing times, but generally what I see among young people is this desire to come together and to understand one another and to dialogue. What I do get concerned, though, about sometimes, and I do wonder about, are my students who maybe feel like they need to stay silent for fear of expressing a viewpoint that may not be as mainstream or culturally, I don't want to say relevant, but just kind of with the times, so to speak. And what I try to do is to really encourage, again, robust dialogue and to have a safe zone for free speech, of course, being respectful and mindful. But it's on me to model what civil discourse looks like in my classroom and to conduct civil disagreements and to show them and model that behavior of how it's done. And I think once everybody's kind of comfortable and there's trust in the room, then you're able to have those conversations. And so it's just interesting because today I was teaching Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. And we were talking about trustworthiness and trust among citizens and how it kind of lubricates social life in a democracy. And they were like, wow, like, I really get it. I can understand now how like all these threads are coming together, from the Declaration to the Constitution to how does this work? And they're like, everything's falling apart. And I was like, well, it won't be if you guys take what you've learned here and you put it into action. So whether they go out in the world and they become businessmen or engineers or whatever, my goal is that they are articulate and informed and empowered citizens.
Right, but so you mentioned, modeling a certain dialogue, but do you do that with the students? I mean, there's not another teacher there for you to model it.
Yeah,
so,
no, I do. I often, and I tell them from the beginning of the year that I may take the devil's advocate approach. If everybody in the room seems to be on one side of an argument, I'm going to take the opposite, just because I want them to know that it's okay or it's acceptable to test out ideas and to explore argument. I put it right in my syllabus from the get-go because I want that to be clear to both parents and to students that this is the intellectual business that we are up to in this classroom. And, I've been very lucky to have the support of my administration in that effort, and I think the work that we're doing shows not only just in our test results, but the kind of students that we produce. Many of our students go on to service academies, or they just choose to enlist. They go into other acts of public service or public service careers. And I just, I think that it begins with one person. You mentioned that we get treated in social studies as a second-class subject, and that is true. But that's why I feel like a one-woman army sometimes. I take it upon myself to be relentless in that battle, to advocate for my subject matter, because it is the fundamental thing that matters in this country. Besides, in a religious institution, creating good Christians, but the second order is to create good citizens. And I hope that I endeavor in that, and I'm helping to contribute to that cause. But I would say to other educators out there, if you're feeling helpless, it just takes one step. And every day I try to remind myself, I'm going to do something that I feel like is advancing the cause of citizenship in this country and civic education.
So Danielle, with Educating for American Democracy, the roadmap, EAD, it takes intellectual diversity seriously, viewpoint diversity seriously. So tell us how it tries to foster kind of diversity of views when it comes to civics instruction.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Tom. And I also want to just pick up a thread that you raised previously and then come to that point about viewpoint diversity. You, as Lianne was just reminding us, you sort of raised the question, why is it that social studies is a second-class subject, and what can we do about that? And I think you suggested that really committing to the knowledge component alongside the skills and dispositions piece is critical to that, right? That there is,
and particularly knowledge that has like a sort of, that creates a sense of obligation. I don't know. Because not all knowledge can do that, right? Not any text can do that, but documents are able to. So,
yeah, there are some central texts that we need as a part of the knowledge and civic learning. Some really important tranches of our history that are a part of our shared inheritance and that we all need understanding of. And so what I wanted to say about Educating for American Democracy roadmap, I think I'm particularly proud of there is that I think we've brought the whole civic learning field to share that conviction. I think 20 years ago, folks in social studies were really sort of split between people who wanted to advocate for foundational texts, core knowledge, disciplinary knowledge on the one hand, and then people who were really focused on the skills of civic life, the skills of debate and compromise, and coordinating a meeting and figuring out how to cooperate with others and the like. And I think it's been really important to break through that split and to see the union of these things with each other. And I love, Lianne, your description of your classroom. I want to go back to school myself. I would love to be in your class. I mean, it just sounds so remarkable and so important because you are simultaneously supporting that foundational knowledge, those core texts, thinking about the Constitution and the like, but then also connecting that to that responsibility for that civil disagreement, that vigorous debate. And so then that does bring us, Tom, to your question about viewpoint diversity. And yes, I mean, first of all, there's the question of, who's doing the work, and can you actually build a coalition of people who bring different perspectives to the table and do work together? And we worked really hard to do that in the roadmap work. So we had a network ultimately of 300 scholars and educators from around the country. And the group was diverse along every dimension. So viewpoint and geography and disciplinary expertise and demographic background and so forth. And even more important than that, though, was that we came together with a shared commitment. We knew we had plenty of disagreements, whether about how to prioritize different subjects that might be taught. From the point of view of our own civic lives, we came from different parts of the political spectrum, but we shared a sense of urgency around how important it is that students have rich civic learning opportunities with these dimensions that we're talking about here. And so we committed to each other right from the get-go that even where we hit disagreements, we would just stick together, we'd pause, and we'd take the time to argue it out and see what kind of compromise we could get to in order to be able to move forward. And we had to do that for numerous dimensions as we worked through the roadmap. We did that around, were we educating for a republic or a democracy, and compromised on constitutional democracy? We did that as we talked about the question of how to think about issues of identity, and came to a view of very capacious pluralism, so that you'll see that when issues of identity come up in the roadmap, we're talking about everything: religion and viewpoint and different kinds of life experiences, military service and migration experiences, a variety of kinds of things, as well as some of the kind of markers that people often talk about around identity. And then the point of view of that picture of pluralism, then sort of why does it matter? It matters because we are a pluralistic society, and it's important to see the assets that everybody brings and figure out how to activate those together. So there's an argument in the roadmap for what you might call a certain kind of confident pluralism, that we all have something to contribute, that out of this many we can forge, the unum out of the pluribus and the like, but that we do that through understanding that inheritance, developing a set of civic skills, and so forth. So there are lots of actual contributions in the roadmap, genuine intellectual contributions that come from the fact that we built a big network that spanned viewpoints, and then we were willing to work together and find shared solutions to sticky points.
Great. So we've been talking about civic education K-12. I want to switch and talk about civic education, higher education a bit. So Robert, you're the director of the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative. Why is this initiative necessary? There's a political science department, there's a history department, presumably, they perhaps did some civic education, do some civic education. Why is this particular initiative necessary? What gap is it filling?
Thanks, Tom. It's a great question. For a couple of reasons. So for a number of reasons that we may or may not be able to get into today, civic education has been not prioritized both at the university level, but also through K through 12. We understand that that's the case. But part of that stems from disagreements about what political science is supposed to do as a discipline, what history is supposed to do as a discipline. But the result is that the kinds of courses that are meant to form good citizens with the knowledge, skills, dispositions, and virtues necessary for just, free, and flourishing republic aren't taught in a lot of those courses. And as a broader phenomenon, that means that in School of Ed, they're not emphasized either, right? And then, with the rise of the focus on STEM, the importance of science and technology in terms of career development and things for our youth, we've just created incentive structures that don't prioritize civics at the K through 12 level and at the university level. And this is particularly a problem from my perspective in state education systems, right? Jefferson's original proposal for what became the University of Virginia was to create a national university in large part to help shape future democratic citizens. That was part of the goal. And so for a long time in American history, civic education was a key part of state education. That was part of why they were in the business. But I think that focus has been lost. And so things like the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative have been popping up in states kind of throughout the country. But it's an effort by legislators in this case to start to correct that. And the reason why it's important that legislatures are involved is because they're the ultimate connection between the people and the university. They're the ones that are representing the people of the states and some of these initiatives. We work, I guess, just jumping back for a second, we get asked the question, well, why at a university at all, right? If you're working with K through 12, why not just send that funding directly to K through 12? At least one reason is we're able to combine subject matter expertise and research at a university in a university setting with the hands-on practice and knowledge that our excellent teachers like Lianne have who are in the classroom. And so that's one of the things that we've been able to do is, in any given year, we do hundreds of teacher hours of training with K through 12 teachers, but we partner with expert teachers and then bring subject matter experts together because, as we've already discussed, both the knowledge of our history and tradition and of our founding documents and what's happened with those throughout the course of our history, paired with proper teaching and instruction in the skills and dispositions and virtues necessary for good citizenship, all go together. So there's been a dearth of it. It needs to happen in universities because we can bring that subject matter expertise. You combine those together, and then you have initiatives like Civic Thought and Leadership.
And is Civic Thought and Leadership, is your responsibility specifically in the K-12 system, or
it's both. Yeah. So it's to improve the state of civic education in Utah and the surrounding region. And so we have other programs that we're developing, a minor and courses and seminars and things like that for our undergraduate population. But where we saw the most immediate place to take action was in the K through 12 sphere. We did our report on the state of civic education, which we can talk about more in the future. But we saw there was a need. We saw where those holes were, and then we immediately started trying to fill those.
Right. So Danielle, you're on the board of fellows at the Institute for American Civics at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and that is similar to the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative in that it was created by a legislature, and I believe it has its own tenured faculty lines, and offers its own majors, and has a sort of mandate to work with the K-12 system in that state too. And yes, Robert mentioned that this is kind of a larger movement that's forming what we call schools for civic thought and leadership. The School for Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, Skedal, was the first of these, and then a number have followed on. So why'd you join the board of fellows? I don't know what led to that, and what important work is the IAC doing, the Institute for American Civics at Knoxville?
Sure. No, I'm happy to speak to that. And I mean, for starters, let me just say, there's just really terrific people who are leading this work in a number of places. And Marianne Wanamaker, who is leader who really lifted this off the ground in Knoxville, is extraordinary. And if Marianne asks me to do something, I say yes. So that's a sort of easy and simple answer to how I got involved. But I just think this effort is really important, and I'm glad to see it growing. I think it is, it sort of bears some reflection on exactly what kind of sort of structures are emerging through this effort. After all, when we think about what the liberal arts are, in some sense, originally they were supposed to be themselves, the liberal arts as such, a school for civic thought and leadership, right? After all, called the liberal arts from the concept of freedom, coming from the sort of Roman context of thinking about education and the like. And all the subjects of the liberal arts are pertinent to civic thought and leadership. This is one of the things that makes civic learning so challenging. At the end of the day, it encompasses everything because it's about answering the question, how should I live and how should we live? And how do we sync those two things up together? And so all of human experience can come under the umbrella of those two gigantic questions. Over time, of course, the liberal arts have also proven their value for support of economic flourishing and well-being, sort of vocational, being able to get a job of some kind. And they've also proven their value with regard to the research enterprise. the question of advancing the frontiers of collective human knowledge. And so with those two additional purposes for the liberal arts, that original civic purpose has been somewhat buried, I think, by the other two orientations. So I consider these schools valuable for calling out, again, that core civic purpose, and then asking the question of both, what does it mean to focus on that purpose? And then how can we make sure that that focal point is tightly connected back to all those core disciplines of the liberal arts? And so in Knoxville, folks are thinking really hard both about the tenured roles inside the new center, but also about the connections to the core disciplines of the liberal arts. And I think it's really important to be thinking about both of those things at the same time. That, I believe, is how we will sort of reactivate that kind of founding layer of the liberal arts directed towards the project of civic thought and leadership.
Mm-hmm. So, and so you're talking about the importance for the campus community and the undergraduate education, perhaps. What about the K-12 dimension?
Yes. No, thank you for that. Mm-hmm. No, I mean, so that's I'm so just delighted to see the burgeoning lines of work here. I've been fortunate to work from a university in collaboration with the K through 12 landscape for, I don't know, getting on to 20 years probably at this point. When I started, it felt very lonely. I didn't see a lot of other people coming from the core arts and sciences disciplines to collaborate with schools. Yes, ed schools collaborated, but the question was, what about the core arts and sciences disciplines? And that's where I think the kind of participation is really valuable. In the arts and sciences, we do have subject matter expertise that schools need. And classroom instructors have degrees of pedagogic expertise that far exceed, honestly, what those of us who are in higher ed have. Like K through 12 teachers are just better teachers on the whole than university professors. Pardon all my fellows, but I think there's a real deep truth to that.
Robert, you can contest that right now.
No need.
So the partnership there between K through 12 educators and subject matter experts coming out of universities is so needed. It's been absent for far too long. And the quality of our curriculum in the K through 12 space depends on reknitting that relationship between universities and K through 12.
Lianne, why don't you speak on this subject a bit? Why don't you tell us just about your own educational experience and how you found it useful in teaching?
So, like many people in attendance, probably my intention was always to go on to do a doctorate, and I loved research and thinking of the higher questions and philosophizing about all this stuff. And then life happened, and I actually got the bug to be a practitioner more than a theoretician. And I spent quite many years doing that. And so what I was able to take now into the classroom as a high school educator is that combination of the subject matter knowledge plus the practical knowledge that I gained from, leading training sessions and seminars and coaching adults in the workforce. And so I find myself in a unique position because I feel like I have the skill set to communicate at, to a level, I would say, no matter who the student is, because I learned that from being kind of in the working world. But I do still have that subject matter that I'm able to pull into the classroom. And so to echo what Danielle said, I think it is really important to build those bridges and those strategic partnerships between these centers for civic learning so that we have a pipeline of future educators that are excited and ready to go into the classrooms and teach. Because the truth of the matter is, not only are we facing a civics crisis, we're also facing a shortage of teachers nationwide. And that's a daunting task. But on the other hand, I think it also presents a great opportunity to rebuild the foundation or to refound civics education in America with the types of educators that we would hope to see in the classroom.
Now, Robert, one of the ways that the Center for Constitutional Studies, which CTLI is part of, one of the big steps there in terms of teacher education is this new MA in Constitutional Government, Civics, and Law that's going online this summer, I think. So right. Would you share a bit about that and how you guys decided to pursue that? And
yeah, happy to. Part of this larger kind of de-emphasis on subject matter in teacher education, for depending on your jurisdiction, you don't need a degree in history to teach history in high school, for example, right? It can be a degree in education, which just means that you have less of the subject matter focus. So what we found is, for a lot of teachers in our state and other states, when they want to improve their careers, either in terms of compensation or qualification, those kinds of things, well, they often need to take master's level credits and eventually get a master's degree. And the courses on offer that tend to be available for teachers are taught through schools of ed and include things like educational leadership, pedagogy, and related subject matters. The challenge with that is that tends to not increase at least the kinds of history teaching or social studies teaching actually in the classroom, maybe some increased methods of those kinds of things, but doesn't increase the subject matter expertise of the teachers, which is often what they're looking for. And so what we decided to do is to create a master's that was specifically tailored in its format and needs to teachers that would be taught in a partnership between the Center for Constitutional Studies and supported by the Civic Thought and Leadership Initiative and our School of Education at Utah Valley University. And so it's offered, it's a Master's of Arts degree offered within the School of Ed, taught primarily by faculty associated with the Center for Constitutional Studies. It focuses on the very kinds of subjects that teachers want to learn how to better teach in their classrooms. And so we start with foundational constitutional and historical knowledge, primary source documents. They take a course on constitutional law, or a two-course sequence on constitutional law. There's also two courses that are taught by the School of Ed on pedagogy and those kinds of dimensions that they bring to the table. And it includes both intensive in-person time during the first summer, and then it's light in the evening and online during the school year, so that you can actually continue to be a teacher and fulfill that really important role. And then we end with a little bit of online, and then we have a partnership with Pembroke College, Oxford University, and so the teachers will actually go to spend their last 2 weeks studying there with some of the faculty there that we work in conjunction with. But it seems to fill a real hole in opportunities. And Lianne, I'm so glad to hear that you're working on a master's in history at Edinburgh. Congratulations and good for you. But these are the kinds of opportunities that really aren't available broadly for teachers today. And so we're trying to fill that in important ways.
Yeah, and if you hadn't started that program there, you obviously would be signing up for the MA there at UVU. No, we're excited for that program and wish you well as you guys commence it this summer. One more topic I wanted to bring up was the issue of K through 5 civic education. So Robert, you and Danielle are on an implementation task force with EAD and in regards to the K-5 level. So I'm wondering what kind of challenges you're seeing when it comes to civic education K-5. What are the particular challenges and what are the sort of the avenues of success that hopefully you're seeing as you do that work?
Daniel, why don't you go first and I'll follow.
Okay. No, thank you. I mean, when we worked on the EAD roadmap, we also, as a part of that, curated a lot of resources. That is to say, we sought throughout the country for high quality civic learning materials that were aligned with EAD, and there's a curated set of offerings on our website. But in doing that work, one of the things we learned was just that the biggest gap was in K through 5. That was the place where we had to kind of go out of our way to start trying to rebuild things. So that's what we've been trying to do. And there are lots of important lessons. They won't come as surprises. K through 5 educators are generalists, right? So if we come back to that sort of subject matter expertise issue, for the most part, they don't really have the subject matter expertise that we are all talking about here as a support for civic learning. So the question then is, how can they have access to that? What are the ways to do that? They're not in a position to go do a 4-year undergraduate degree, right, as a part of teaching in K through 5 space, or a second one. So at any rate, I think an opportunity is that very often museums and cultural organizations do have that subject matter expertise and are pretty well positioned to partner with K through 5 educators. So I think that partnership concept is really at the center of this work. How do you make sure teachers are linked up with people who can support the subject matter expertise element of the work? So that would be one critical learning. But Robert, I'm sure you have others as well to share.
Well, I mean, it's been interesting to see some of the projects. So that, I mean, the site support committee reviewed applications from around the country for different projects. And we have everything from, whole state systems that are trying to align their standards to the Educating for American Democracy roadmap, to, a national history museum on a battleship, that's trying to do the same for their interactive offerings in their student programs. So a wide variety of possibilities. But just to double down, we've done some research for our state, which is very reflective of what Danielle described nationwide, is that elementary teachers know that civics matters. They deeply care about being able to do it, but they are generalists, and they're often went through educational systems that de-emphasize civics. And then once they're in the classroom, they also, in terms of testing, again, things like literacy and other subjects are emphasized much higher or than civics, or civics is not at all. What's interesting is research shows that actually the teaching of civics and civic subjects does a better job increasing reading comprehension and literacy than teaching reading comprehension and literacy does. So there's actually, and part of that, again, is the engaging nature of the material. There's a lot of possible explanations for why, but that's the case, that it's actually the best tool from the administrator's perspective, even in the things that are being tested, but they often don't know that. And so what we've found is we've been partnering with the We the People program and K through 6 classrooms to say, look, there's this great program that you can do. We have a good culture of doing that in the state of Utah. But they're like, but I don't even know some of the basics, right, that I ought to teach. I know the Declaration is important, but remind me why, and how is it connected to the Constitution? And so we've done, training specifically targeted for these K through 12 educators, and they fill up in 48 hours, and then we do another one and it fills up in a matter of days. So they're hungry for it. They recognize the need for it, and this is where things like, these funding through EAD with the alignment with the roadmap, or these schools of civic thought have the opportunity to really have a meaningful impact for these teachers that understand that they want to do a better job and just don't have either the subject matter background or the resources to do it.
Yeah. Lianne, you've only been a high school teacher, not K through 5, right? But I wonder if you want to weigh in, just given your classroom experience, what you think civics at the K through 5 level really needs, or what would allow it to succeed?
Yeah, I mean, just in my conversations with other educators, I think that what we face oftentimes as teachers is the challenge of navigating administration and meeting what they want, meeting the state's, standards of learning and the curriculum needs. And, I was shocked, frankly, to hear that there are districts that are reducing the amount of time which educators have to teach civics. And so hearing that, you only have 15 minutes a day to allocate to teaching something like the Declaration, like you just can't do it justice with that. And so, I think that from a logistical standpoint, it's going to take working with administrators and school boards to ensure that we, as a whole entire community, are dedicating the attention that civic education needs, because it is critical. It is the survival of our country. There's an article that's floating around recently about how civic education is a national security matter. And so, I think that I try to communicate this in my own space, that teaching civics does touch upon so many other aspects of life. And the truth is, you need to understand how to interact with your government and what is required of your government to provide to you as well, and understanding what that relationship is like. So it's critically important that all stakeholders involved in this situation are working together so that we can kind of repair the crisis and move forward.
Just to build on that, if I may, Tom, briefly, sometimes the reaction that we have as stakeholders in the civic sphere, whether it be policymakers, legislators, or their citizens, often blame teachers for this problem. And at least in our research, that is a very misplaced condemnation of teachers. As we surveyed teachers in our state, we found that they really did care about civics in meaningful ways, and the kinds of things that your average resident of Utah cares about were the kinds of things that they were trying to teach. But it was a question of incentives and resources and the time that they were given. That was the biggest thing, is time and opportunity to learn more, to do better, right? And so all of the efforts, whether it's the teacher in the classroom or the principal, or state superintendent, whatever it is, you need all of those levels involved, because it's not fundamentally a teacher problem. This is something that they're working within a structure that's making that challenging and difficult. At least that's what we found in our research. Almost goes without saying that we shouldn't be blaming the teacher, but I just think it's worth emphasizing.
Thank you. So we had a couple questions that I wanted to address that were submitted beforehand. So let's take them up now. Chris Edamala would like to know, how do we encourage enthusiasm for history, civics, etc., especially when the political climate is so unpleasant and discourages thoughtful engagement? So that's kind of, it's like the polarization question that I asked you, Lianne, but here the issue is, where does the enthusiasm come from? Where does the excitement come from? How do you really get kids enthusiastic to learn civics?
Yeah, it's been an interesting few years in the classroom. I would say that when I first started, it was very polarized. But what I've noticed is, I think the generation of students that was just entering high school as COVID began, there's just kind of like this malaise and a lack of just interest or wonder. And so what I try to bring to them whenever whether I'm teaching history or civics, is just to kind of appeal to the human experience and understanding, like, okay, who are we as people, and what are these people also going through, and what can we share together in that experience? And, I think you have to be engaging. You have to be willing to meet the students where they are. There's going to be days where you're not going to have a lot of wins. But if you can have small wins and small gains over time, those things accumulate and you will get buy-in. But yeah, I can understand where the question comes from, because there's so many voices that you hear as a teacher, certainly in the K through 12 space, and to Robert's point, it's discouraging because you feel like, oh, is it me? And, I just try to put the blinders on. I worry about my own four walls, and I know what I need to do. And that's just the way that it is. And I'm going to keep pushing forward. So, I would just, again, echo what I've said before. And it's just that you can't give up hope. You have to keep trying, and you have to do new things every single day. If that's what it takes. And, that's what I find sometimes with educators as well, is like we fall into a rut because we're like, oh, this worked before. But we have to embrace a kind of a spirit of entrepreneurship and take ownership of our classrooms and say, well, what can I do in my space to make sure that I've had a good day or a successful day? And like I said, that success is going to look different in every classroom.
So, Danielle, just sort of briefly, how do you get people excited about studying concepts like liberty, equality, and justice?
It's funny. I was thinking about this the other day, just my own personal experience, and realizing that my dad obviously was doing all this work, but that's the sort of only the tip of the iceberg in the story. My father was also very involved in both the bicentennial celebrations, 1976 and then 1989. And so as a kid, like I remember the materials of the bicentennial work kind of like flowing through our household. And I think honestly, that has to be a major part of the answer for my sort of own obsession for these materials and this work. And so here we are, so close to the 250th, 2 years away. We have an opportunity for the kind of celebration that engages and inspires young people. Lianne said in the very beginning that she found in her classrooms that the kids were less polarized than the adults. So I think in a certain sense, the challenge for us reconnecting young people to this work is actually a challenge to us ourselves. Can we depolarize in such a way that we can collectively celebrate in 2026? If we could do that, then I know we can get the kids too. So that's how I would probably think about it.
Very good. One other question we received from Patrick Peel from the University of Michigan. He'd like to know how we can get the donor class to focus on civic education reform. And Danielle, you have some experience fundraising.
I'd like to know the answer to that one too.
Can you copy me on that one? Yeah,
exactly.
The enthusiasm of the students. How about donors who are necessary to support this work?
Well, I mean, first, just shout out to the Jack Miller Center and everybody who supports the Jack Miller Center for doing this important work. It's courageous work, and my experience is that it takes a kind of a special degree of courage for donors to lean into the civic education space for all the reasons we've been talking about, because of the sort of landscape of complexity, bureaucratic complexity, polarization complexity, and so forth. So for me, the question is, when there are those beacons of light, centers of courage, like the Jack Miller Center, how can we draw on that courage to inspire courage in other donors? I don't know the answer to that one yet, but would love to solve it with all of you.
Great. Robert, you've done some fundraising with the legislature. Do you have any, what gets the legislatures excited for supporting civic education in a greater way?
Well, to the concept of courage, Civic Thought Leadership Initiative started because a freshman legislator who had a long and distinguished career in the Utah National Guard was just concerned about what he called middle of the road civics for things like his ROTC students and others, and that was our start, and we're very grateful to Representative Burton for that. In terms of continuing to advocate for civic education at the legislature in good years and in bad, showing them the actual impact that it has in classrooms is what matters. Because everyone now, I think we're to the point where as a nation, nobody's thinking we don't have a crisis of civic education. We may disagree about the proper remedies for that or the causes, but we all get that there's a problem. And so that if we can emphasize the importance of both teaching the good of our heritage and history and the ways in which we've improved that and the ways in which we still have yet to improve it, that kind of both approach, as it were, that I think is exemplified in many ways in Educating for American Democracy, and show that actually happening in the classroom, it gets light bulbs turning on because they see that there's the problem and it addresses it.
Great. Well, and Charles Kurz has one very simple question there for you, Danielle Allen, which is, where's a great synopsis of EAD? Where should he go or others go who are interested in learning more about it? I'm sure we can drop it in the chat.
Exactly. Yes, I was just going to go ahead and put the link
Okay.
in the chat. And the request for synopsis is a good point. We don't really have a synopsis. There's a report, and then there's the roadmap itself. But I think we're probably due creating a synopsis that would make it a little easier for people to enter into the conversation. So I appreciate the prompt to do so. We'll get on that one.
Great. Well, thank you all. It's been a wonderful conversation. To our audience, if you're interested in future webinars that the Jack Miller Center is doing or staying up to date on our various activities, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We will, a lot of these questions that we addressed, very briefly here, we will expand upon with our National Summit on Civic Education this year, which will be November 14th and 15th in Philadelphia. Keep your eyes peeled for more information on that. Finally, I will echo Danielle and offer a special thanks to the donors of Jack Miller Center and of the Founding Civics Initiative, which is our initiative that focuses for making this webinar and all the work that we do possible. If anyone wishes to support our programs in the future, please just visit the Jack Miller Center website, jackmillercenter.org. Thanks to you all, and thanks very much to our panelists.